Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And I want to talk specifically about punks in Beijing. Punk music. I love live music. I've been going to concerts my whole life. I didn't stop when I started traveling. There are live shows playing everywhere all the time. Not always, the variety that you can find in the States, but there's always some concert going on somewhere or a bar somewhere that has live music. So I love going to concerts. And I was kind of worried when I left the States that I wouldn't see a concert again because I left at 25 and I knew nothing about any other country. And when I arrived in China, the whole country was so formal and regimented compared to the loose art culture I was used to that I didn't know if they had live music. I found out pretty quickly that they do have live music, and in subsequent trips abroad that every country has live music. So I wanted to find where the shows were. And I kind of got lucky because, actually, you know what? Looking back on it, I got extremely lucky. It's actually kind of weird that I found the exact type of concerts that I like to go to in what some would consider the most authoritarian country on the planet after North Korea. Punk concerts happening in public in the heart of Beijing. Get a ticket, go in, have some beer, watch a punk show. Up until I moved to China, almost all of the concerts I had seen in real life were punk shows. My friends were in punk bands, and when they weren't playing, we would go to the shows and mosh to punk music at teenagery years old. And there were plenty of classical concerts and plenty of dance clubs and like techno and house music. I don't know the difference between those really. But I wasn't very interested in that sort of music at the time, especially going to see it live. When it was live at 25, all I wanted was some energy in the room, some motion moving around, interesting looking people, talking about music and the band culture that I didn't really know anything about because at that point I still couldn't play anything and I didn't get the whole being in a band culture. I had been around people in bands, but that wasn't my thing. But I liked being in live show culture. When people were playing gigs, and like I said, there's a lot of energy in the room and everyone's swept up in how much fun we're having or how much we're rocking the fuck out. So one day someone told me that there was a bar with live music near his friend's house, and we went over and visited his friend in this interesting little community near Andingmen, which is a neighborhood in Beijing, and there's a particular hutong or alleyway where businesses and everything are called Wu Dao Ying. That is my favorite hutong. Go look at the hutong episode. I talk all about Wu Dao Ying there. But we got off the subway and went to Bill's friend's house and hung out, met his family. We all had a few beers. Ellis told me his theory about psychics, which is that they are real. And the reason we don't know about them was because they would never reveal themselves because they were psychic, so they would know if you were wondering. And then, more importantly, he showed me a cheese and wine foreign food import store where I went very often to buy foreign imported beers and cured meats and cheeses. Now, when we were going to Ellis's house, the sky was still light, so the alleyway, the hutong, wasn't really full, but in the 90 minutes or a couple hours we were hanging out in his home, when we were walking back, the sky was dark and the alleyway was packed. So hutongs are small alleyways where businesses, homes, restaurants, game like stalls all take place inside the walls of these alleyways. And so this was going on, like a very lively culture. There's a corner shop where you could get a beer, like I said, restaurants everywhere, and music was bouncing out of several holes in the wall. And so we went into one called School Bar. It was started by teachers, I think. But that spot instantly felt like I was at home, and I was like, okay, this is where I will go to watch music. There was a loud punk band playing and someone was screaming into the microphone. There was a bunch of people walking around moshing, which I never thought I would see in China. That's where all the goths were hanging out, spiked collars, leather. The girls looked good. I had no idea that any Chinese people even wore that type of clothing in China anywhere. And that's not a crazy thing to think because they were being closed down like every few months. The government would close them down, then they'd open up a week later if the right people were bribed, or maybe if they just were like, I guess it's not too countercultural, and they'd open back up. So the places did get shut down, but they were open a lot more than they were shut down. And even if one place was shut down, other places were going on. And Wudaoying was a cultural hub. There was independent art and independent music. And these weren't a lot of traveling shows. They were teachers. They were travelers to Beijing, and then local Beijing artists or musical artists who found each other, met each other in this hutong, formed bands and started playing shows, or just jammed together and hung out. But it really was a fascinating place. It was probably my favorite part of the city. Like my favorite place just to hang out in Beijing, I would say that was that hutong, Wudaoying. There was something new being created there, which is very rare to see in Beijing, or maybe culturally obscured, which isn't always bad. It's really cool to go to a restaurant that's been open for 400 years, or, visit the Imperial Palace that's thousands of years old, or whatever like that. But this was a new art and cultural scene being created from nothing. And there was some good music playing, especially if you like punk. There was jazz nights, which were really cool. And since the hutongs are made of cement, there was a lot of soundproofing. So wherever you went, you weren't really being disturbed by the other places. So you could get some cool tinkling on the piano if you went in the dimly blue light bulb bar across the street. But I gravitated toward the high energy scream punking. And I went in, and there are 2 floors. There's a balcony area and a main floor area, and then some tables. And there's red leather and beer-stained wood. There's a bar there. Get a few beers to support the theater itself, and then get the rest of them that are half price right outside, literally 5 feet away at the corner store. Have a beer outside before going back in to get a beer in the theater. But it was a very cool spot. It was all hardwood. It was all, all the wood was original and old, and the whole place bled history. And it was just cool. There were amps everywhere and guitar cases. There wasn't a lot of space, so all the bands that were playing just had all their shit in the small green room. And then they would switch places, or some would use each other's instruments. It wasn't always punk. Sometimes there was ska or just rock or just different. There were different genres at School Bar, but I usually saw rock or punk there. And it was good. That kind of knocked my socks off too. Like, I just, again, didn't expect such counterculture to be able to flourish and basically thrive in this hidden pocket within Beijing. So it was so cool to see people dressed in, midriff rainbow t-shirts with tattoos all over their body, lip rings, body piercings all over. Girls and guys with dyed hair and just wearing like leather costumes like they looked like Blade from the Vampire Blade. It was great to see all of that stuff. It was super cool. And that's where they all hung out. School Bar. And there were outside, the whole neighborhood was filled with interesting German eateries, or like there was a schnitzel house. And there were a ton of imported beer stores. All the foreign, that was like the foreign culture center that was integrating itself with Beijing. I guess I should say now that Beijing destroyed that neighborhood and it's not there anymore. If there's another place in Beijing where the cool culture is still happening, someone please reach out and let me know, because when I went there, I didn't hear about anything or find anything, and I was really bummed out to find Wudaoying had been sterilized, culturally sterilized, I would say. But let's go back to the fun memories. So, These are the punks in Beijing. These are my people. And I went to school bar twice a week after that, like very, very often. And I can't describe exactly how soul-soothing it was that I could listen to great music, new music, with a beer in hand, either reclining on a bench or bouncing around in the mosh pit with everyone. I mean, how cool is it at the end of a 3 or 4 hour evening just listening to music and hanging out with your last beer of the night in your hand and just reclining, semi-conscious, spent from dancing and meeting new people and seeing new things, exhausting every single word I knew in Chinese and more. Completely liberated from any pent-up stress inside. It's like after I go on a 6-hour run, I'm just like, boom, got everything out. I'm empty vessel, at peace, comfortable. That's how it felt at the end of one of these nights. Except, I was drinking beer the whole... Actually, you know what? I did drink beer when I was running fairly often. I'd stop in at stores every couple of hours. These punk shows in Wudaoying were such a culturally satisfying experience. And after we hired a new teacher, Oliver, hey man, I went every chance I could because Oliver, great guy to talk to, can scream sing in a way that I can tolerate, which I don't really like screaming metal bands. And Oliver's band was some hardcore screaming metal. But he rocked, and it was great to listen to him. The same way, like I said, I can't listen to screaming a lot. I can listen to At the Drive-In scream the whole album. That's fine for me. If you can scream well, I'm into it. And Oliver screams well. Now, his band did play so loudly that I couldn't mosh out in front all the time, but I did it a lot to support my friend, which I had plenty of experience with supporting my other punk band friends. And it was just so fun to go to these shows and feel like I was back in the scene. In the middle of a city that when you walked outside, every building looks like a prison tower. But in this tiny alley, there's punk music shouting from the doorway, and there's rainbow punks and spike punks shooting the shit outside, having a beer on the street corner. The alley corner. So I was going to these shows a lot. And then whenever Oliver's band played, I tried to make sure to go. And I even brought dates to punk shows, which is real difficult. I mean, there's not a huge punk scene in China. So every time a girl would see punk for the first time, if she wasn't already one of the punk girls, it was usually, what's happening? Why am I wearing a sundress here? Why are they wearing leather? What do you mean they're Chinese? They look like monsters. They look like hot monsters. And you know what? The dates went well. People like new experiences, and they like if their date's having a good time. I was having a great time every time I was there. And it's such a fun alley. There are little art galleries you can also go to. There's so many things to see in this tiny little pocket of Beijing. There were so many things to see and listen to and experience in this tiny little pocket. I bought a patch from School Bar and sewed it onto my decathlon little day bag that I had, and that thing, I fixed that day bag up so many times so it lasted 10 years. It lasted for 5 years, I didn't have to fix anything, but I think I tore it on something, and then I had to keep fixing it every year or so with a new strip of umbrella fabric or nylon cloth I got somewhere. But that School Bar patch was on that thing for the whole decade that I had that bag, and it always brought me great memories because that School Bar day bag went with me to 20 countries, and I took it to the waterfalls in Thailand. I hiked mountains in every country I've been to with that one. It was an Oktoberfest with me. It carried gallons of cherry wine back to my tent. That was a working little backpack, and I always felt like I was carrying some of that cool, new Chinese punk culture with me because I had that little School Bar badge on it. One of the other cool venues that I only went to once, Oliver's band was playing there, and he invited me, and it was a bit out of the way, but I just felt like I would be missing out on something if I didn't go because it's so easy, convenient, I'll say. Beijing life is so convenient because you have more money than you can use. Everything is already paid for. You don't even have to leave the apartment. They'll deliver food to you. They'll deliver TVs to you. They'll deliver computers straight to your door with almost no shipping cost. And everything's super, super cheap anyway, and you have a high salary. So it's very easy to just, instead of going out on the weekend or going to try something new, staying in, eating your favorite food, drinking some beers, or meeting the same friends at a bar, drinking some beer, meeting some friends at a restaurant, getting boba tea, whatever it is. It's really easy to fall into a routine because it's all right next to you all the time, and whatever isn't right next to you will be delivered to you right away, like immediately. So I would get into a rut where I'd be like, oh, I guess I'll play The Witcher for 3 weeks. And like, that's what I did. So whenever I got the opportunity to do something new, I would try to actually do it because I knew I had to keep myself social and keep myself connected to the world around me because the world around me was how I was enjoying such convenience and fulfillment, really. A great job, good friends, learning something new every day. I should stay connected to the world. That's what is giving me all of these benefits. Even though the punk bar that their band was playing at was far away, and I was lazy and maybe playing The Witcher at the time, who knows, I did make myself go, and it took me a couple hours to get out there. I can't remember if I rode a bicycle or not. I might have. But anyway, I showed up at this spot. Actually, yes, I definitely rode my bicycle there. And it was such a cool spot. After I took a road off a paved road, I got onto this tiny, I think it was paved, path for a good mile, like a pretty long way, and it kept getting more and more green, and then there was just bush and trees all around me. And I looked at the place I was supposed to go. At that point, I didn't use Google Maps or data or anything. I just always had my offline maps, and I just put a pin where the thing was supposed to be, and I would ride my bike there, and I did that all the time. It was fun exploring. But a mile into the forest, and I've left the city behind, I was like, what? Where is everything? And then, all of a sudden, through this corridor of trees, the path opens up into a road, and it swoops down a small hill to my right that there's this wooden hut, cabin, I'll say. It's a big lodge. It's like a wooden lodge sitting in this, not field, but this verdant meadow. And I wish I could remember the name of it because it was some cool punk name. But it was this cool live music spot kind of outside of the city in the middle of this park with no other buildings around or anything. So they were going to crank it up to 11. And after we all enjoyed a few introductory beers to the place and got some food, and everyone was, settled into the spot, and the light outside, evening was coming, it was 7 p.m., then the music started, and it was wild. Every band was awesome. Oliver screamed and jumped around with the ferocity and energy of a jungle cat. It was just so cool to be at this show. Like, that's a memory, that's an experience that helps create who I am today. It's an encouragement to push myself into being more social and trying new things, even if it might not be easy, because I could have one of the coolest nights of my life, which I did. It was so much fun. And after all the beer had been drank, the bands had played. Just kidding about all the beer being drank. There was plenty more beer. But after the bands had all finished and we were all kind of hanging out, the owners of the place said that the pool was open. So right next to the lodge was a full-sized, full-depth pool. And all the punks screamed and ran out and just jumped into the water. And I didn't know about the pool. I didn't have a change of clothes. But very quickly, it became apparent to me that that was such a stupid reason not to jump into the punk lodge pool after one of the coolest shows you had ever been to. And we're drunk, and everybody around you was super cool and nice, just talking with all the punks and having a great time. And so I jumped in the pool. in my clothes, and it was great. Just played in the pool. Everyone's running around inside while the punk music is going on. We're all screaming and shouting and stamping our feet and moshing, stomping around. So we were all sweaty and gross anyway, so it was really nice that they let us in the pool. And yeah, everyone just kept flipping in and jumping in. It was a great time. And then I rode my bicycle back home, soaking wet, and was dry by the time I got back. I took a shower and probably played The Witcher. But maybe I just collapsed on my bed with probably an extra couple of beers that I picked up on the way back and played the evening over again in my head because it was just such a cool experience of, again, new culture that I would never have thought I could find in Beijing. But these guys, these artists, because they found each other, they were able to create these cultural experiences that were novel and exciting and unique and culturally significant. And it ended with a bunch of comfortably numb punks in a pool. I made friends with a lot of the teachers that played there, and it was just cool to hang out with them. But once I left China, I didn't keep in contact with many of the people. I kept in contact with, a handful of them. I still talk to them. But not everybody I knew in China I still talk to on any kind of a regular basis. And I don't play any music, so I'm not really part of the scene as much as I would be if I had played in a band with any of these guys. So then the craziest fucking thing happened. I went back to the States for a while to visit, and I rented a room in Portland, Oregon. And the proprietor of the house was this really cool hippie lady, and we just started talking, and I told my stories like I always do, and I was telling her about how I taught English in China, and now I'm visiting for a little while. And she came back a couple days later, and she asked me, "Hey, can you come here for a minute?" So I went into the house, and she said, "This is Andre. He rents the room in the corner," which is like the opposite from where I was. I was renting this little cabin outside the main house, and I hadn't really met anyone else in the house. And I was like, "Oh, hey, man, nice to meet you," confused as to why she was introducing us on a play date. And she said, "He actually lived in Beijing also." And I was like, "What? Wow, that's crazy. When were you there?" And we started talking, and we realized that he was there at the exact same time I was. He was teaching in the same neighborhood I was, and he went to School Bar and Wu Dao Ying almost every weekend because he played music, and he was in the punk scene. So we must have seen each other. He was there the days that I was going there all the time. And he knew Oliver. So I had a now personal connection to this guy. We happened to both be in Beijing at the same time, in the same scene, with the same friends. And then a couple years later, we both independently decided to rent out a room in this random Portland, Oregon hippie lady's house, who was super cool, by the way. If she had let me stay there longer, she was selling the house, but I definitely would have stayed there longer if she let me. It was a nice little cabin. And he was Russian, so he was in the States. I don't even know why. I think he was like a naturalized citizen of the US, but he was originally from Russia as a child, I believe the story was. But how crazy is that someone I didn't even know in Beijing, but we must have been in the same places at the same times, we would both serendipitously rent a room from the same person in a state, in a city 5,500 miles away that I hadn't planned to return to that year. I still can't get over how insane a coincidence that is. That's like going to a punk show here, go to a punk show in San Antonio, Texas, and then you guys meet up in Chengdu, China, and it just randomly happens that the two of you meet up in a noodle shop one day, on the other side of the world, having never known each other, until you decide to talk and swap a story and find out that your stories match seamlessly. So freaking nuts. So we hung out almost every day after that, or every other day. He was working on his cool music tech stuff. I was narrating books in the cabin. But we swapped stories about School Bar and Wu Dao Ying, and mostly talked about how often we were there and how crazy it was that we now met up literally on the other side of the world, randomly in temporary housing together. That might be the most statistically bizarre thing that's ever happened to me. My mind's sending red flags when I say that, so there might be other ones, but that one's a big one. That's a personal connection on the other side of the world in a random city that I chose with a dart on a map, basically, because that's always how I travel. Okay, I've probably reiterated that like 6 times, so I'll shut up now. But the insanity of that aside, it was great to talk to someone who knew exactly what I was talking about when I shared how amazing it was to see this new cultural experience in Beijing, where I never expected it to be this new art being created in this tiny alleyway in a pocket of Beijing. And he felt the same way, and we talked about how cool it was people from so many different countries thrived in this area. Shared creativity and cultural experiences. It was so cool. We also both agreed that the Chinese goth girls looked good. Real good. Andre played in a few bands over there and even played with Oliver a couple times. I think he filled in for the drummer, or he filled in for someone that wasn't there a few times, something like that. And yeah, I think that's a good note to go out on. It was such a fascinating closing chapter of what had been a huge part of my life while I was living in Beijing, going to see this live music every day and being so happy that there was such a creative culture in a city that I was worried would be dead and sterile. And they did, like I said, culturally sterilize Wu Dao Ying, so that alley has nothing of interest anymore if you go there. But because I never would have expected it originally, I cannot help but think there is a pocket somewhere still in Beijing where this cool stuff is happening. People are making new connections and creating new music and art. And I'll meet those people when I go back and visit, or they'll meet each other in other countries across the world someday. The punks in Beijing made that entire country more alive for me because I knew, despite any general cultural ignorance or authoritarian crackdowns by the government, or some extremely narrow opinionated take like the goofy Chinese people aren't creative. Really, you know all 1.5 billion of them? You visited all 3,000 miles wide and 2,000 miles tall of that country and have enough experience to make that claim. You've seen every corner where every artist and calligrapher and musician is playing and have concluded that they have no creativity? That is absurd and is a lonelier, more boring world. But you hear things in the news, and people who aren't familiar with the country might only believe what they are told from a third party, from someone who's never been to China but is reporting on it. So for me, knowing this happened, knowing these cultural experiences were shared and friendships and relationships started and art thrived in the middle of, yes, authoritarian Beijing, is such an important memory for me to carry around and to share when I can. Because I have a lot of stories about China, and I think this is one of the ones. I think the punks and body-piercing tattooed goths playing loud punk rock music every other day in this alley is a reifying, mind-broadening experience to understand that it happened. That's something that happened. Historically, it's a piece of history of that city now, that there were punks and a awesome punk rock alley. And there are still people visiting China right now There are still people from many other countries, and there are still musicians, and there are artists that I know there. So, like I said, there's gotta be a pocket somewhere of awesome people making multicultural experiences together, creating new things together, and just fucking rocking out. And I will be looking for those people next time I am in China. So if you know where they are, you could save me some time and just, let me know. bitofarambler@gmail.com or all the socials. Send me a message. I want to know where the art is. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next time.